Our sermon text we look at this morning, Deuteronomy 7, and pray that the Lord bless us with wisdom, the wisdom for salvation. When the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy toward them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their sons, nor take their daughter for your son. But they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. But thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you because you were more in number than any other people, for you were the least of all peoples. But because the Lord loves you and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers, the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments. So, what do you know about the conservation of matter? Well, since many of you are big nerds, you probably know a lot more than me. But even if you're not a big nerd, you've probably heard that energy and matter can neither be created nor destroyed, but only transferred. So, for example, this cup of water, that's not a full cup, I drank some, but this cup of water, can you create it? Well, obviously God did at the beginning, but man can't. But man, at least theoretically, can create matter. You can theoretically create water, and it would take 2.25 times 10 to the 16th joules of energy. Now that doesn't mean much to me because I'm not an electrical engineer, but that's 250 nuclear bombs worth of energy to create one glass of water. Not worth it. It also works the other way. As you nerds know, you can create energy from matter. You're not destroying it, you're transferring it into energy. So those nuclear bombs I was talking about, you know how much matter, like the nuclear bomb that we dropped on Japan, you know how much matter was actually used to turn into energy? You might think it's a lot. It's not. It's less than 1/3 the mass of this dime that was transferred into energy. It's crazy. So much energy from just a tiny bit of matter. So if you didn't know before, now maybe you know a little about the conservation of matter. But what do you know about the conservation of holiness? You really don't need to know about the conservation of matter unless you're a physicist or an engineer of some sort. But we all need to know about the conservation of holiness, because just as there are many wrong thinking, many false assumptions with the conservation of matter, for example, when we burn a fire, we think we're transferring matter into energy. We're not. When you burn wood, the actually result is the exact same amount of matter as you began with. It's just transferred into ash and gases and water vapor. But there's far more false assumptions with the conservation of holiness. Man continually thinks that we can destroy sin and create holiness. We can do neither. Sin cannot be destroyed, only transferred. Holiness cannot be created, only transferred. Why is that? Well, we'll get to sin in a moment, but let's talk about holiness. Why can't it be created? Because it is absolute purity. That's what the word means. You can't create purity from something that is impure. And yet that's what man attempts to do all the time. Man's sinful heart and the lies of Satan encourage him, push him down a path where he thinks, and sometimes our sinful heart thinks, that we can change our good deeds into holiness, that we can create our own holiness. That's what the people at Tower of Babel thought. They thought they could build their way to heaven. Now, it's certainly amazing that man's been able to figure out the atom and nuclear power so that we can transfer matter into energy. And they're even, I'm told, working on an actual experiment to transfer energy into matter. But that's actually a two-edged sword, because it makes man think that we can accomplish anything, just like the people at the Tower of Babel. Makes us think we can earn heaven. And God is absolutely clear. We cannot create holiness. By the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. You can't clean something with a dirty rag. It doesn't work. And yet all we have is dirty rags. As Isaiah points out, all our righteousnesses are like filthy rags. We can't make ourselves holy. We are sinners. So we can't create holiness, but why can't we destroy sin? Why can't we make up for it and get rid of it? Well, we try that all the time. We try to make up for it. We try to forget it. We try to sweep it under the rug with varying degrees of success, but ultimately all of them fail. You say something in a moment of anger to a spouse that really hurts them. Does going back to them and complimenting them and say you didn't mean it, does that take away the hurt? Could they remember that thing you said for the next 50 years? Absolutely. You, in a moment where you were distracted while driving, run over someone's child. Can you destroy that sin? Can you make it not happen? Paying them a bunch of money, does that make up for what you did? Can you, and that's just the parents, what about the kid who's dead? How are you going to make up for them? Certainly we can succeed in forgetting about things we've done and deluding ourselves into thinking that what we did was justified, but God does not forget. The list of our wrongs is never forgotten. God knows them. And he doesn't keep track because he's an old grumpy man who wants to hold a grudge. He keeps track because he is a God, a holy and just God, who punishes iniquity. So, to review, by conservation of holiness, I mean we can't destroy sin. We can create it. Well, we can create it indeed. Every day we create a lot of it. But we can't destroy it. And we can't create holiness. But we can destroy it. Adam and Eve had holiness. They lost it in the Garden of Eden. Christians, you through faith have holiness. You have the holiness of Christ. But Christians can destroy that. How? By the sin against the Holy Spirit, rejecting him, kicking him out of our hearts so that we lose faith. So since we can't destroy sin and we can't create holiness, where does that leave us? That leaves us damned. That leaves us, as we heard about in the gospel reading, heading to the place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. But we didn't come here this morning to hear that there's no hope. Why would you come to a place to gather around it and have a service when there's no hope? Well, you don't. We came here because we have a certain hope. Yes, sin can't be destroyed and holiness can't be created, but it can be transferred. You've probably heard the expression, I've paid for my crimes. You know, someone who does something, maybe they run into a public building and do a bunch of damage. Maybe they commit a more serious crime. They pay the fine, they do the time, and afterwards they say, I've paid my debt to society. Now, we might wrangle about whether the imprisonment and the fine that our justice system gives is actually fair, that they've actually paid the debt to society. But whether the justice system got it right or not, by our government, they are considered to have paid their debt. So, that's how we transfer sin. It's transferred into justice. And so you say, oh, great. Okay, God, give me the bill for my sin. I'll pay it. Maybe I have to spend a few hundred years in purgatory. Maybe things will be bad for a while. Well, here's the thing. There is no purgatory. The Bible never says there's a purgatory. There is no purgatory. Why? Because the wages for one sin is death. That's eternal. Our sin is transferred to condemnation, to guilt and punishment. And it is eternal for one sin. We can't pay off the debt of our sin. And yet, as I said, we came here because we have a certain hope. And that certain hope and our joy and the reason for a service and celebration is because our sin was transferred to justice. Just not justice on us. It was transferred to Jesus, who became sin for us and took the justice that we deserve. He took the death and hell that we all deserve for all the sin that we have created. All the sin we create on a daily basis, he takes it. I told you before how much energy it takes to create, theoretically, make one glass of water. It was 2.25 times 10 to the 16 joules, which is around 250 nuclear bombs. That's the cost to make one glass of water. What's the cost to pay off the debt of sin? It was justice coming down on Jesus. Him being forsaken by his Father, him suffering death for us all. And that's not theoretical. It's historical. It's the gospel. Why would Jesus do such a thing? Our text tells us why. He tells Israel why he redeemed them from Egypt, why he made them and how he made them his people. And Egypt was, while he did redeem them from Egypt, Egypt was also a picture of a greater thing he redeemed them from a tyrant far worse than Pharaoh. God had redeemed them. As he redeemed them from their sin, he redeemed you from your slavery to death and sin and justice for our sin. Why did he do this? Our text tells us. Not because they or we are a great people, but because of his love. You know what's really interesting and sad? If you read the ancient Jewish commentators on these verses, after that verse where God says, it's not because you were the greatest of people, you know what they commented? They said, no, it's not because we were the greatest, it's because we were the most meek. Which is an exact contradiction to many other places in Scripture, where God says, you are stiff-necked and stubborn people. And the history bears that out. It was not because they were morally better than other people. God makes it plain. It was grace that led him to redeem them, to pay the price, to transfer their sin. He took it. And it is that with us too. It's not because we are better. It's not because we're greater in number or greater in morality or any such nonsense that Satan tries to get into our head and our heart so that we think we can create our own holiness. We can't. It is his grace that led him to take our sin upon himself. But that's only half the equation. We sometimes forget that. But imagine that you had an employee who didn't mess up. They didn't burn the building down. They didn't lose all your clients. They didn't cause chaos and problems in the office. Is that an employee worth keeping? No. So he didn't cause any huge problems. That doesn't mean he's valuable. As Jesus said elsewhere, if you've done all that you've done, great. You are still an unprofitable servant. So what if we have not punched someone for saying something we didn't like? That doesn't make us worthy of being in heaven. God didn't just transfer our sin away. He made us worthy of heaven. How? By also transferring his holiness to you. That's how he made you worthy of heaven. You know, I talked before, if I can find it, here's my dime. 700 milligrams, less than a third of this dime, is what was transferred into energy in that nuclear explosion. Only took a little, and yet made a huge and terrible impact. What was the cost to transfer holiness to all people, to give it to them through faith? It wasn't 700 milligrams, it was 70-ish kilograms, which is the weight of an average person. But the only person who could do that was not average. The only person who could do that was Jesus. God become man, born under the law to redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. He become man to be tempted in all the ways we are tempted every day, and we fail every day, often creating sin. But he, not once, when he was reviled, he didn't revile in return. With him, God was well pleased. And that holiness, that righteousness, he has transferred to you, so that God is well pleased with you. God, by an amazing and terrifying act of justice, transferred our sin to Jesus, and he paid for it. And by an amazing act of grace, transferred the righteousness and holiness of his Son to us. There is only one Jesus. What do you do with such a gift? You know, I brought up the conservation of matter because there are some parallels I wanted to bring out, that while matter and energy can't be destroyed by us, only transferred, our sin also can't be destroyed. And as we can't create matter and energy, we can only transfer it. We can't create holiness. But I thought those analogies of how much energy it takes to make even a little matter, and correspondingly how much energy even a little matter can make, help us understand what a great gift we have been given by Jesus transferring our sin away and transferring holiness to us. What are we going to do with that gift? Conserve it. Conserve the holiness that we have been given. That was God's entire message in our text, with him telling them to tear down those altars, to not marry people that were going to bring them away from Christ. Now, in the New Testament, God has not forbidden us to marry unbelievers, but the first commandment still stands. We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. So if there is an altar in your heart or an altar in your life that causes you to fear, love, and trust in God, something else besides God, remove it. Tear it down. It's only Jesus that can transfer and did transfer our sin away and transferred our holiness to us. There is no other way to take our sin away. There is no other way to give us holiness. And so we are to treasure it. What's going to make you want to fear, love, and trust in God above all things? When you treasure what a tremendous expenditure, tremendous gift, tremendous love was spent to give those things to you. Israel, throughout their history, failed to treasure that. You can see it in the very commentary on the verses of our text, where they started thinking, oh, God did this to us because we're so awesome. As soon as you start thinking that God did this for us because I'm so awesome, you're not treasuring what an undeserved gift this is. You're not treasuring the gift. And so we need to daily come back to this gospel, to see the tremendous price that Jesus paid to take away our sin and make us holy, and to see also that I deserve it not at all. That's how we treasure the gift. That's how we then want to fear, love, and trust in God above all things, and find the altars in our hearts and our lives to other gods, to things that we fear, love, and trust more than God, and tear them down, because those things can't create your holiness. They can't destroy your sin. But Jesus can transfer and has transferred your sin away and transferred your holiness to his holiness to you, so that you are holy and his special people, worthy of heaven. Amen. Let's continue with singing our next hymn, hymn 371.